is now my pleasure to invite the chair of our next panel, a long-standing champion of the Capes, a great supporter of the Latin America Cape, the Deputy Chief Executive of Universities New Zealand, Dr. Bronwen Kelly, to introduce our first early evening panel. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, and buenos noches. I think I can say that now that it's dark, right? Good evening to you all. Thank you, Matthew. As Matthew said, I'm Bronwen Kelly, and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at Universities New Zealand Te Pokai Tāra. And I have the privilege today of chairing this next panel, which will focus on the connections between New Zealand and Mexican universities. The panel comprises 8 people in total. 6 will be representing universities, and 2 are recipients of the Prime Minister's Scholarship to Latin America. I'd like to invite the 7 panel members who are actually here in person to join me up on the stage. Please make your way up, and just, if you don't mind leaving the end chair vacant for me, that would be great, thank you. And I think we have one online. Artemio, is he online? Just doing a, Hello, Artemio, can you hear us? He looks a little frozen.
Yes.
Okay, we'll just give him a few minutes. In the meantime, I'll make the introductions. So online, when he unfreezes, we have Dr. Artemio Mendoza, Senior Research Officer at Lincoln University. We have Associate Professor Lee Davidson from Victoria University of Wellington, Te Herenga Waka. Associate Professor Richard Reddaway from Massey University. Angela Davis, who's the Director of Strategy for the Centres for Asia Pacific Excellence. Dr. Elizabeth Macpherson from the University of Canterbury. Dr. Michael Gschwendtner from the Auckland University of Technology. Lupesina Koro, who is a transport engineer from Oregon. And Zach Thomas, who is the Strategic Partnership Lead at Galileo, as well as a venture partner at Rali Ventures. I'm glad I wrote that one down. That's quite a mouthful. Okay, I'll come and join you over there. Super. Lee, hello, we haven't met. We'll start off with you. As a museum and heritage studies scholar at Victoria, you've been working on a project with the Capes for several years, but the roots of this project go back even further than the Capes. Can you please tell the audience more about this Cape project, including how you came to work with your Mexican collaborator, and what have been the main challenges and achievements of this project?
Okay, thank you, Bronwen. Yes, it is working. I've just realised actually I first went to Latin America exactly a decade ago, so it's been 10 years. I went to Mexico to research the first ever exhibition exchange between Aotearoa and Mexico. That involved Te Papa's Etuaki Standing Strong and a Mexican show about the Aztecs. And while I was there, I met my collaborator, Leticia Perez, who was a professor at the Escuela Nacional de Conservación, Restauración y Museografía. And we discovered mutual interest in whether international exhibitions achieve their aims of improving relationships between different cultures and nations. So we teamed up and we embarked on a research project exploring this question through a case study of that exhibition exchange, and that culminated in the publication of a book about our research. And in that book we made a number of recommendations for best practice in international cultural partnerships and creative projects. And our Cape projects really have been a series of initiatives aimed at putting these recommendations into practice to try and strengthen relationships between, cultural partnerships between New Zealand and Latin America. So in 2020, we ran 5 workshops around New Zealand for cultural and creative professionals, and these were focused on how to establish cultural partnerships with Latin America. And we created 9 internships for students and emerging cultural professionals in Aotearoa and Mexico to create an exhibition about contemporary Mexican life and culture. And I would consider that exhibition our great biggest achievement. It was called De la Milpa a la Mesa, a Mexican food journey. I hope most of you saw it. So it was created by that binational team of interns and students working with Leticia, myself, and professional mentors. The whole process of developing it was grounded in intercultural theory and practice, and it had the aim of creating a space in which New Zealanders could hear Mexicans tell their own stories, and in that way get a deeper understanding and more empathy and appreciation of their amazing culture. So this exhibition was first presented in Wellington in early 2021, and based on that success we toured it around Aotearoa, so from Christchurch to Foxton and then finally to Auckland. And by the time it closed in May this year, it had been seen by thousands of New Zealanders. Probably not surprisingly, the main challenge was doing international work during a global pandemic, and also in a very tight time frame and a relatively small budget as exhibition timeframes and budgets go. So I'm very proud that we proved that it was not only possible to do this, but to do it in a way that exceeded our expectations. And it's been very exciting to see its real-world impact on the way in which New Zealanders think about and understand Mexico and Mexicans. And so that's the thing I'm proudest of. Thank you.
Well, congratulations. Sounds like a hugely successful initiative. So well done. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Richard, hello. We also haven't met yet.
We haven't.
Lovely to meet you. You are a maker and curator of art at Massey, whose engagement with the Capes relates to a website about creative economies that will be launched soon, and we've just heard a little bit about it. So please tell us, how did your academic links to Mexico begin, and what have been some of the highlights and the learnings along the way in terms of how art unites our two societies?
Yeah, certainly. As you say, I make art. That's part of what I do as an academic. So a couple of decades ago, I sort of got interested in the Baroque. That's that kind of wildly excessive art style that the Spanish so successfully exported to the Americas back in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. So my partner Kate and I, she's an architectural historian, we decided to go to Mexico and look at some colonial Baroque architecture. And of course we saw lots of that, and it was absolutely amazing. And we thought it was going to be very different Mexico, different from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it was. I mean, it's hugely different. But there were things that we recognised as being familiar. And I think thinking about it, it was this realisation that both of our cultures, our places share colonial histories. And we're both dealing with or working through ideas of post-colonialism or decolonisation. I met a Mexican artist, Eduardo Abaroa, and I asked him, could you still see Mexico as a Baroque culture? And he said, oh, absolutely, yes. And he talked about how the Baroque for him was how cultures rub up against each other. And he, of course, talked about the relationship of Mexico with its huge neighbour to the north and how that was a Baroque territory. And I thought, oh, this is an interesting idea. And so I brought that back to New Zealand and thought, could we see Baroque tendencies in contemporary New Zealand culture? And that's a kind of a weird idea because particularly Pākehā culture, we tend to see ourselves as very sort of dour and Protestant. I'm thinking Vincent Ward's movies, for example. And so it was strange, but I kind of looked at some of the contemporary artists and I managed to find 6 whose work I thought you could see, or you could see as Baroque, even if you wouldn't call them Baroque artists. So we put that together and we took an exhibition of these 6 artists to Mukaroma, which is a museum in Mexico City. It's part of UNAM. And it was kind of fabulous. It was a wonderful experience. We got a lot of support from the Embassy of Mexico here, the Embassy of New Zealand in Mexico, and Creative New Zealand. And that was wonderful. And following on from that, and that's what you can see on the website, following on from that, we've, in Aotearoa School of Art, we've kind of tried to develop a Latin American strategy to sort of get exchange, cultural exchange happening. So we were able to bring Eduardo Abaroa here to do a residency at the school, and following that, the curator Ruth Esteves, who was at the time, 2 years ago, one of the curators of the Sao Paulo Biennale. So we're very keen on that, and I think last year, just to sum up, last year I went to a symposium that the Cape had about sort of business relationships with the Americas, and one of the speakers said that the most difficult thing that he'd found was when he was talking to people in the Americas about New Zealand, they tended to think of New Zealand as a kind of as a country. We were sort of bumpkins, that kind of, we didn't have much culture, and I thought, we can do something about that. This is what we do. So.
And did you, I hope?
Well, I hope so. That's the plan.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. And if I can just ask the panel members to keep their mics quite close by, just so that we can have better audio. Angela, moving on to you. As a professional staff member at Otago, your main contribution to the Capes has been the strategy director for the consortium. However, you've also been deeply involved in one project, the development of the e-game called Aotearoa Explorers for primary schools. So can you tell us a little bit more about this e-game, including how it was created and what its intended goals were?
Sure thing, yeah. So like with these other 2 projects, we really were looking at creating tangible ways to help New Zealanders connect with the region. And we wanted to look at how digital technology could be used to achieve that. And we came up with this concept of Aotearoa Explorers. It wasn't called that to start with, but that's its final name. That would create an immersive experience. Obviously, we know young people are really engaged with gaming. That they could, from a New Zealand perspective, which is very rare in the gaming world, explore the world around them. So the game was underpinned by our global citizenship education framework of identity, connections and responsibility, and really deeply informed by academics at a number of universities, particularly at the University of Otago. We had people from geography, computer science, education, also at the University of Waikato, and of course our Cape colleagues certainly advising on the content. We're really conscious of creating connections around Indigenous people in the region, and we had a few themes. So as already mentioned, food is a really great gateway into culture, so talking about some of the more traditional authentic food rather than perhaps, as Ricardo mentioned, some of the things that are more typically associated with Mexico. It's had over 4,800 visits to the landing page, so we're really thrilled with the response. Teachers have really embraced it, and young people certainly are really enjoying it. Teachers are very clever, as we know. They didn't need a full lesson plan, but they use this game as a sort of instigator, where it helps young people go through and connect with these areas, and then they go deeper and further into that. So yeah, we've been really excited where it's got to. The team are now looking at how to use AI to keep the game alive and develop it further. Obviously there's some challenges with that, but looking at how that works in a cultural setting as well. So you can actually all play it. It's all free and available. We had to make sure it was available for all devices. Kids use Chromebooks often, which are the lowest spec devices on the market. So just aotearoaexplorers.co.nz and you'll find it. So I definitely encourage you, if you've got kids or you just want to have a look, to do that. So In terms of the Mexico area, we wanted to include some things that were, perhaps a bit lesser known. So, in particular, the city Oaxaca. I mean, a lot of people just would never have heard of that before. Oaxaca, or how is that pronounced? So it's just been incredible that to sort of deepen that knowledge, take it beyond the surface level through, quite a simple but, technical behind the scenes game. And, hopefully when these young people grow up, they'll take that knowledge through and that sort of engagement and hopefully end up visiting one day. And we're just excited to be able to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, pass the parcel. Speaking of children's games. Super, thank you. Now, the creation of knowledge about themes linking New Zealand and Mexico extends well beyond the Cape project. So now I'm going to turn to Elizabeth, who is a member of the University of Canterbury's Law Faculty, and who has developed an interest in Indigenous rights to water in Australasia and Latin America. Elizabeth, how did that academic interest come about?
The interest came about 20 years ago when I was a young and passionate Pākehā litigator working on Waitangi tribunal claims for iwi and hapu. And back then, it kept coming up all the time, but what about water? Not resolved yet, of course. And I started to look around the world and became really fascinated by some cases that were coming out of Latin America where courts had been upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples, of their authority and, ownership of water. And so I packed my bags and travelled to Latin America and worked on a working holiday visa at a law firm in Santiago. And 20 years later, and 3 Latin American children later and a PhD later, I'm still working on it. And my research has extended beyond Chile to Colombia, Ecuador and Mexico. So I'm really enjoying that work, and I think that we have so much to learn from each other and so many connections to make and so many commonalities in terms of culture, legal systems, common issues of justice that, we can take inspiration and solidarity from each other. And language is such a beautiful tool to be able to bridge those connections across English and Spanish, but also all the wonderful Indigenous languages in Latin America.
Fantastic, thank you. It sounds like it was a fruitful relationship. So who are your closest Mexican partners and how did you develop those collaborations with them?
My closest Mexican partner is Julia Torres Ventura, who is a Indigenous rights lawyer and activist from Chiapas. And she now works with me at the University of Canterbury. She found my research and emailed me, and I very quickly found a position for her, and we've been working together ever since. I've also developed connections with universities, with ANSANA that Miguel presented earlier. We went to a conference at the University of Guadalajara in 2018, got to talk about some of these common issues and bridge some of these connections. And through my Riverine Rights project, which is looking at legal protections of the rights of rivers, I've built connections with researchers, Professor Rachel Sider at CSAS in Ciudad de Mexico. So I think there are so many people with common interests in this field across these places, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And how do you think your work enriches both societies?
I mean, I think that those person-to-person connections that people were talking about earlier, Aotearoa, New Zealand and Mexico are both settler colonial countries with some very distinct historical and cultural context, but also lots of similarities, lots of things that we can come together to look for answers for these difficult problems. So I think it just starts with relationships and everything else happens after that.
Indeed, indeed. Super, thank you so much. We're going to turn to Artemio on Zoom. Can you hear us and see us? I'm not sure if you can see us from the camera at the back.
Yes, yeah, I can hear you and see you. Okay.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us from the Apiculture New Zealand conference. Artemio, your work at Lincoln on plant fungi and pest biocontrol brought you to Mexico, to New Zealand, about a decade ago. How did that move come about?
This is, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak with in this forum. And the decision was a little bit, was a challenge decision. After my wife and I spent 5 years in postdoctoral studies in Germany, we decided it was time to move. And we have two options. One of them is to come back to Mexico, but the other option was to look for other countries. We were lucky enough to find a place in the Bioprotection Research Center in New Zealand. The reason to move here is because we searched a little bit about how is the life in New Zealand, but also the type of science that we are doing here in New Zealand is a little bit is quite interesting and was quite close to our objectives. The bioprotection just gave me an opportunity to continue the collaboration with national and international collaborators, and also many from Mexico.
Thank you, Artemio. I just want to do a quick sound check. Can everybody hear Artemio? Okay, sort of. Is there any way we can turn the volume up, please? Oh, is it?
I can speak close. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much.
So sorry. Yeah.
Artemio, how has your research changed substantially in New Zealand, or has it changed, not changed at all? Just wondering if where you work makes a difference in terms of your research in biocontrol.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is a really quite interesting question, and definitely what changed, and was, to be honest, was a really good to change because before I was doing fundamental science, which are really important, but when I came to New Zealand, I realized that the science needs to have also another has to have some applications. Yeah. Right now, I am doing not only fundamental science but also applied science, and I am using a multidisciplinary and multi-institutional approach. Yeah. The same, I am working with how microorganisms communicate with plants. But now I am using these signals to apply, for example, in the seeds, or apply into the hives. And these signals help to protect plants against drought or heat. But also these signals are important to protect honeybees against parasites like varroa mite, which is an important pathogen in the apiculture sector. Yeah, it's the main cause of colony collapse in honeybees. Therefore, it was a change. Yeah, I am doing a little bit, the combination of both applied science and fundamental science. Before I was only doing fundamental science, which is
Thank you, Artemio. And how is your research supporting industry either here or in Mexico?
My research is directly connected to the Lincoln University is an agriculture university. Yeah, it's specialized in that area. And I am currently seeking for collaboration with the industry. My research is currently supported for the Ministry of Primary Industry and the Royal Society of New Zealand to identify and implement, for example, natural products produced by microbes to protect honeybees. But also I currently have multidisciplinary, and I am co-leading a multidisciplinary and multi-institutional investment to support Natahu farming and forestry, and also diverse seed companies. This investment was supported the last year for MBI, and we aim to identify molecules to protect commercial plants, trees, pastures, native plants, and native species plants to protect against drought and heat stress. Yeah, the science that we are doing is directly connected with the industry.
Wonderful. Muchas gracias. Well, now I'm going to turn to Michael, who is the director of AUT's Thermodynamic Engineering Research and Applications Lab, where he leads a team contributing to the development of environment-friendly thermodynamic cycles. Another thing I'm grateful that I wrote down. Michael, in addition to having a PhD student from Mexico, your lab collaborates with Energon, is that how I say it? Energon Industries in Monterrey, Mexico. Can you tell us how and when this association began?
Well, this is actually quite a nice story. On our website, we offer consulting in the development of Stirling engines. And for those who don't know what that is, it's a heat engine that turns heat into power. So one day, back some 11, 12 years ago, I got an email from a company in Mexico. They told me that they had just started their business and they wanted to turn solar power into electricity by using a Stirling engine. They told me they had found some information on the internet and built a prototype, and it didn't work. Then they built another one, learned a little bit, and well, it worked a little bit, but not as it should be. So they thought they needed help, and that's why they contacted me. And we exchanged some emails, and a few months later, I was going to go to Germany via Los Angeles, and we decided that I visit them in Monterrey. We agreed that I pay for my flights and they look after me in Monterrey, and boy, they did. So my flight was delayed from Dallas to Monterrey, and I arrived way past midnight, and I didn't expect anybody to pick me up. So I collected my suitcase, and there were 3 young guys waiting for me. 3 students who, as it turned out, they had won a business award to start up their company. Before they took me to my hotel, we stopped at a restaurant, and in Mexico they are still open past midnight. Did we have a few beers? Maybe. So next day they picked me up from the hotel, and before we went to the company's premises to do business, they took me to a mountain, to a viewing point up in the mountains where we could look down on Monterrey, and they told me that it's important to them to build a personal relationship before we even do business. And I found that quite impressive. So we went back to their company and discussed design of Stirling engines and the mistakes they had done and so on. And I spent there 3 or 4 days, and we were quite productive, but they took me to restaurants. Did we have more beers? Maybe. But we clicked, we had the same sense of humor. We talked about the difficulties in Mexico, corruption and so on, and they said they believe in their country, they wanted to make this a better place. And I was so impressed with their attitude, with how professional they were, their hospitality, and we built a friendship that still lasts, and it will continue.
Relationships, relationships, relationships.
Yep.
Yep. Thank you. Now, despite the challenges of distance and COVID, how have you been able to grow that collaboration with Energon?
Well, we haven't. They moved towards photovoltaic cells, but due to this friendship, and that's really to their credit that they put so much effort in, we stayed in contact over the years. And only before I even knew about this organization and this event, we started to talk about a new project. And I brought our Mexican PhD student with us, Alberto. We want to do a project with him. I want to use his skills, I want to use my lab, and we want to develop something that will ultimately benefit the Mexican company. So it will be a collaboration. So currently we're looking for a postdoc for Alberto. So even though we didn't have much interaction or collaboration over the years, but due to the relationship that we formed, this is going to continue, and this is going to be a really interesting project, provided we find the funding.
Fantastic, yes. Well, all the best in finding the funding, and a postdoc student as well to support you. Yeah, wonderful, thank you. Now, university connections are not all about academic relationships, of course. Student experiences are fundamental to these relationships in our universities. So now let's talk to our recipients of the Prime Minister's Scholarship to Latin America. First off is Lupesina. Lupesina, before you joined Oricon as a transport engineer, you went to Querétaro, did I say that right?
Almost.
Almost. Querétaro?
Querétaro.
Querétaro. Querétaro in Mexico.
In Mexico.
As a University of Auckland student on the Prime Minister's Scholarship to Latin America in 2019, please tell us more about your experience in Querétaro.
Getting there. Nah, it's all good, Bronwen.
Practice.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora koutou katoa. Malo le soifua malangi ma. Malo ni te tato kainga. Buenas noches a todos. Perdón, mi español no es muy bueno, entonces si quieres habla conmigo, habla despacio, por favor. Y voy a tratar. What an incredible evening. Such a wealth of knowledge, experience, wisdom that's been shared tonight. And honestly, I'm still just trying to soak it all in. Often our panelists have said, for those of you who don't know, and I'm those, I don't know, so I'm really, thank you, Matthew, for the honor and the privilege to speak here tonight to my experience in Querétaro in 2019. In one word, the experience was really profound. That was more than one word, apologies. And in one sentence, it was probably the most audacious trip of my life. I left in 2019 with pretty much no knowledge of the Spanish language, no approval from my parents, who are very strict Samoan parents. And the only reason I was able to afford to go was through the Prime Minister's Scholarship for Latin America. I get to the airport, and it's like similar to Michael's story. Actually, I arrived at 11:30 at night, except that my host family had told me, oh, catch a Uber. They don't speak English, so here I was, like, translator, dictionary, you know, on my phone, and I was like, okay, that means catch a Uber. Jumped in the Uber, an hour later, and the whole hour I was praying, like, oh, I hope I'm actually going to where I need to go. You know, my parents don't get a phone call this time tomorrow. So eventually we get to the location, and I've arrived, and I felt really foreign. I was scared, which is pretty expected, but eventually I found my host parents, and we linked up. The first thing that struck me, so obviously I was there for uni. I was there on exchange as an engineering student, so I was cross-crediting my papers in network, algorithm, optimization engineering, all stuff I don't do today. So I'm very thankful for that. But I was cross-crediting my papers in that degree, and I attended Tecnológico de Monterrey Campus Querétaro. Incredible university, very sophisticated, much more upscale than the University of Auckland where I'd come from. And straight away I started to notice the differences that could be applied back home in the way that teaching and learning happened in Querétaro. Things like the collaboration spaces, all open planned, the chance for students to engage with like sleep pods. They were very realistic about the experience of students, and so they had a sort of facility called sleep pods, and it's 24/7. So if students were there all night, they could stay there, do their study, have a little nap, and then go home and be safe in their travels to and from university. All of these really incredible, and they're not exactly like difficult infrastructure to implement. It was just really small ideas, and it was things that Campus Keretaro had a population of about 3,000 students. The University of Auckland has a population of about 40,000. So huge difference, but there were still opportunities to implement these really innovative, but quite simple solutions back in Tamaki Makaurau. And I thought, firstly, that was really powerful. The second thing upon reflection in my time there was that it was the first time outside of Samoa that my name had been pronounced correctly by the majority of the population. That blew my mind. So my name is Lupesina, but most people call me Lupe, and I did not have to correct a single person the entire 5 months I was there. That was amazing, and I think that's a very small example of this relationships, this common values, this shared knowledge, shared understanding, that's sort of been the themes that have just been coming through really strongly tonight. And I think, yeah, that was sort of an example that you'd all appreciate. And then thirdly, about my time there was, again, the manakitanga, the hospitality, the warmth that I felt. I was homesick for the first month, but I got over it quickly because I looked around and I saw that these people value the same things that I did. Family, culture, faith, food, you know, sorted. Job done. Food and cervezas. Yeah, so that was sort of a bit of a summary of my 5 months there. Bronwen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lupe.
Yeah, that's fine.
Tell us a little bit more, though, about your experience and how it made you reflect on your own cultural background and how, therefore, we can grow relations between the two communities here and in Mexico.
Awesome. What a question. So I am Samoa Tokelauan. My dad is half Samoan, half Tokelau. My mum is full Samoan. And one thing that I found really surprising, that's not me.
Don't worry about the dinging.
Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
One thing I found surprising but really beautiful is, upon reflection, the biggest takeaway from my exchange was an appreciation of the Pacifica culture. And that comes through because I grew up in Tamaki, which is the most Polynesian populated city in the world. But we are tiny, like in comparison to the rest of the world. Pacifica itself is very small, Samoa smaller, and then like Tokelau smaller. It's literally a dot on the map if you even see that. And so I grew an appreciation of my Pacifica culture because when I was out there, without sort of it like happening on purpose, I was an ambassador for my culture. So people would look at me, they'd see my name, they'd see Lupe, then they'd hear me talk, and they're like, wait, what? That doesn't sound like someone from South America. And then they'd hear me, you know, because I'd be on the phone to my parents or something, and they'd hear me speaking Samoan or Tokelau. And that's when I started to kind of have to unpack to a lot of my Mexican friends that I was born and raised in New Zealand, but my parents come from Samoa and Tokelau, which is probably why I don't look like a lot of the people from New Zealand that you've met before. And so it was their first exposure to maybe sometimes New Zealand culture, but almost all the time Pacifica culture. And the closest comparison I could make was, have you seen Moana? I'm pretty much her, like, you know. And so that's where the conversation would start. And I thought that was the most powerful thing, that in me going like thousands of kilometers across the ocean, I grew this incredible appreciation for my own culture all the way back here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with our very close neighbors, our Pacifica neighbors in Samoa and Tokelau. So that was amazing. To be honest, I don't have much more to add because I think the people in this room have a really solid understanding of how we can, build our connections and our communities here in Aotearoa. I think the real job is, referring back to what Mr. Speaker said about enabling those opportunities for our rangatahi, there's a huge desire for that. There's a huge desire for our Pacifica, our Māori rangatahi, who are disproportionately affected by many factors in New Zealand, to have those overseas experiences. But financial barriers, equity barriers, access to opportunities, all of these things, you know, it can't happen. Like, we don't get that exposure if these barriers aren't there isn't a middle person to help us break down those barriers. And so we in this room understand the value of that connection, but it's about taking that outside of this building and making it more widely known. And then secondly, enabling more opportunities for a diverse range of our rangatahi to hopefully experience the beauty and the profoundness of my trip.
Oh, thank you, Lupe.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing such to such great extent. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Zach, lucky last, or last but not least. You went to Latin America on the Prime Minister's scholarship, and then you ended up working in the tech industry in Mexico for 3 years and have recently returned to New Zealand. Please tell us about your experience and how working there has influenced how you see the New Zealand-Mexico relationship.
Kia ora, Bronwen. Un gusto estar aquí con ustedes esta noche. Just want to further that last point that you made, Lupe, and what the speaker was saying earlier about more opportunities for young Kiwis to head over to places like Mexico and to work. And, you know, the speaker mentioned getting them over there for an overseas experience. And I really do believe that over time, more and more young Kiwis will choose Mexico City over London, for example, going forward. And hopefully we can get to that stage, right?
Sorry, London.
With all respect to London. So yeah, I went to Mexico in 2019, and there I was working for one of the largest venture capital funds in the region, investing millions of dollars into startups, specifically in the fintech space over there. So I started working there. I ended working for a large American tech company that was looking to enter the Mexican market, that wanted to buy a bank in Mexico, so going through the process of trying to buy a bank in Mexico, pretty complicated. But I kind of just want to really hone in on the importance of startups to Latin America and kind of what I've seen firsthand there. Between 2019 and 2023, tens of millions of Mexicans have been banked for the first time, right? That has huge impacts in terms of poverty, in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of social mobility. And it's really a revolution that's taking place over there at the moment. And I was fortunate to be involved in that and to see that firsthand. And so kind of drawing that into some of the lessons that I think we can learn in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is, Mexico's done a great job at really paving the way about how to cultivate and nourish a tech industry over there. They passed, the fintech law in 2018, which made it easier for startups to compete with the largest banks in the region, to really kind of help them grow faster. So I suppose in conclusion, there is amazing things going on in Mexico that Kiwis don't realize. There are tens of millions of people that are being positively impacted by startups. And to any young Kiwi that is considering going over there to Latin America, I strongly recommend it. It's such an exciting place to be right now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Zach. I want to go too now. I'll see what I can arrange. Right, we have now 1 minute left. Instead of my asking the panel any more questions, I wondered if the audience had a question for our panel. Any questions from the audience? No? Okay. I'll ask just one more question, if I may, from the panel, because this is an issue dear to my heart. What actions need to be taken by New Zealand universities and government agencies to step up engagement with Mexico to a new level? Now, I'll invite any of the panel members to answer that, if you wish.
Actually, I'd like to answer that.
Michael, thank you.
I think it's investing in young people, bringing them across the border from Mexico to New Zealand and vice versa, and maybe fronting up some money to pay for Alberto.
Wonderful, and a postdoc. Super, thank you. Well, please join me in thanking my esteemed panel for their generosity and their warmth, as well as all the information that they have imparted this evening. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.